You're listening to Beyond the Plate with Andrew Kaplan. This sounds so weird. You're listening to Beyond the Plate with Cappy.
We're opening a Federal Donuts and Dizengoff together in Miami, and guess what the corporate name is?
D's Fed Nuts?
D's Nuts.
Yes! Hey everyone, this is Cappy, and you're listening to Beyond the Plate, a podcast where I sit down in person with the world's culinary elite to explore their journey into the industry and the social impact they have made in their community. Every episode, we share inspiring stories of what it means to be in today's bustling hospitality industry. You may find me and keep up to date with this podcast across all social media platforms at On Cappy's Plate, or go to www.beyondtheplatepodcast.com. For this episode, I sat down with Chef Michael Solomonov. Solomonov is one half of Cook and Solo Restaurant Partners and executive chef and co-owner of Zahav, Philadelphia's pioneering modern Israeli restaurant. He is a 4-time James Beard Award winner, including Outstanding Chef in 2017 and Best Chef Mid-Atlantic in 2011. Solomonov's first cookbook, Zahav, A World of Israeli Cooking, co-authored with Stephen Cook, won James Beard Award for Book of the Year and Best International Cookbook. In addition to his duties at Zahav, Solomonov co-owns Philadelphia's Federal Donuts, a coffee, donut, and fried chicken establishment, Dizengoff, an Israeli-style hummus eatery, Abe Fisher, a Jewish-American small plates restaurant, Goldie, casual falafel bar with fries and tahina milkshakes, and Rooster Soup Company, a classic luncheonette with a philanthropic mission. They donate 100% of their profits to support Philadelphia's most vulnerable citizens. More on that later in this episode. Before we get going, I'd like to share a couple things with you, as this episode is rather personal for me. I started traveling to Philly regularly for work around 2009. Michael Solomonov and his partner Stephen Cook have been extremely hospitable to me each and every time I am there. And it's not only me, it's the 2 girls from Paris who were sitting next to me one time at the bar. It's the older man dining solo who lives down the block from the restaurant. It's the server who used to work there 5 years ago that still loves coming back to eat there. For me, Philly in general has been a very kind and generous city, one I consistently call one of the most underrated cities. In fact, I'd like to change that right now and call it rated. I also want to thank Michael for being open and honest with me during this discussion, as he's faced many ups and downs in his life, including his brother David being killed just 3 days before he was to be released from the Israeli army. Last but not least, much of the philanthropy Michael and his partner Stephen Cook do is one of the main reasons I decided to jump into this podcast game, to share stories like the ones you will hear in this episode. His Rooster Soup Co. project you will hear about changes people's lives every single day. Please enjoy this conversation with Chef Michael, what's up bro, Solomonov. You're a Philly-based guy. Here's the crazy thing. We met almost 10 years ago when you had Zahav and Percy Street Barbecue.
Yeah, we probably had Sochi then too, right? The Mexican restaurant?
I don't know. No.
No? We might have already sold that then.
Yeah. I think we met at Zahav, which either Sarah Rosenberg, our mutual friend, or maybe like James Narrow told me.
I think James told me that you were going to sit at the bar.
Yeah. It was one of the first places that I went into in Philly, and I just sat at the bar, and the next thing I knew, I had like badass Israeli food and beyond in front of my face.
Well, I love it when you come to the bar. Cappy at the bar is like a, it's like a holiday for us.
You know what I still can taste? There was a soup that, it was like an oxtail soup. It almost was like a brown, clearish broth with like a meat. Was it a meatball in there or cumin? Or
it was probably like a Yemenite style. It probably had like a little bit of turmeric in it and maybe like even like a little bit of cinnamon.
Yeah.
Oh, dude. No. It was the kube. It was a dumpling, a semolina dumpling stuffed with oxtail and beet greens and beets. Yeah, that was on, like we stopped doing soups at Zahav.
Oh, really?
Well, it's like we're a small plate restaurant, so when people order soup, it's not like a tiki drink. You can't just put like 4 straws in it. I mean, I guess you could, but...
I could have put 4 straws in that soup.
So yeah, that definitely sort of dates anything recent. So yeah, that was a long time ago.
Do you not like putting soups on your menu?
I love soup. I love eating soup. It's just really, really difficult. We'll do soups for like parties of like 10, that like have like a set menu, but we get into trouble with serving soup because because some people, even though everybody kind of shares, there's a stigma about sharing certain things. You'll have like a four top that will all rip apart like lava and all like double dip in hummus, but anything like liquidy, they won't share. And I'm like, the germs, you've already spread germs. It's all good, you know?
I had a friend in Chicago who's a chef, and he has a soup on his menu because his partners were like, you need to have a soup on your menu, but he hates it, but they're freaking delicious.
What's your favorite soup of his?
Oh, God. He did a white gazpacho type soup, but it wasn't chunky. It was pureed, and it had like almonds and grapes and some other stuff in there, and it was so delicious. And actually, Katie, my wife, who you know, and I wound up serving it at our wedding.
Oh, nice, dude.
Lee Wolin from Bocas.
Yeah,
too.
Lee is like one of the best chefs in the country, in my opinion. Gazpacho Blanco is amazing too. Yeah, they put like bread in there too. It's like bread and almonds and grapes.
It was like sherry vinegar.
Yeah,
almonds. It was
so
delicious.
good. How did he garnish it at your wedding?
Slivered almonds, toasted like brioche or something, maybe like half grapes. That was fucking good. All right, so I like to just start off with setting the tone of where we are. This isn't too sexy. So we're sitting in the third floor boardroom area of the Edition Hotel in the lounge area, but no one's here, so it's all ours. And the best part is that our view is of Madison Square Park and the original Shake Shack,
Oh my God.
which is pretty great.
No line right now.
We met over about 10 years ago, and at that time, you were like Philly guy, which you still are, but you didn't have anything outside of Philly, and you were all about staying in Philly. And as innovation happens, and I love it, 10 years later, you're in New York, Miami. What changed your mind?
Well, at that time, we had just opened Zahav and we were tanking. You know, there was no innovation was like keeping the lights on for another week. Zahav was a struggle at that time. We almost closed our first year.
Really?
We opened in 2008, and it was like right when everything was sort of collapsing economically. And Philly in particular the Phillies won the World Series, which is great if you have a bar with a TV, but not if you're like an Israeli restaurant. It was a rough year. I was struggling with like substance abuse issues, and I was in like rehab and all that stuff. And yeah, we had an awful first year. It was terrifying. I literally had to call my dad and borrow money from him to make payroll.
Is your dad, is he in Israel? Or
Yeah, he's in Israel. I'm like, hey, I'm 55 days clean. Can I have $10,000? And I remember him, I was like talking to my business partner, Steve, and he gets a call. It's like from my dad to be like, is everything okay?
Oh, shit.
You know, because it was not I don't think we ever cashed his check. I don't think we ever actually used it, but it was like very close to, yeah, it totally sucked. So that was then, and we obviously have come a long way since then. And then we opened, at one point we had Percy Street Barbecue, which we since sold. We had that, and we had Zahav. So we had two big restaurants, one of which Zahav was doing okay at the time. Percy Street was not making any money. We were like getting a little bit antsy, and we ended up meeting these guys that had brought Stumptown coffee into Philly. So like that sort of wave of coffee houses came to Philly. I was talking with one of the founders of this coffee shop, Bodie. His name was Bobby Logue. We were talking about Pennsport, which is this like section of South Philadelphia that at the time was sort of untapped. It was like, oh, there's this cool area, and he lived there, and he showed us this little like 600 square foot like pizza place. And then he was like, hey, do you and Steve want to do something with me and Tom? We're gonna, we want to open another coffee shop down there. Rent is really cheap. We were thinking about donuts. And then at the time, Steve and we were like eating Korean fried chicken wings like all the time. I was like obsessed with them. There's a really good place in Elkins Park, which is just north of Philly. Yeah, so there's this like amazing place called Soho Cafe that it's like an old Jewish population that lives in Elkins Park, but then like a lot of Koreans. So there's this amazing Korean chicken wing place. So we were eating it like all the time. And so we were like, oh, let's do donuts and then we'll do fried chicken. It was a joke. Our fifth partner, Felicia, who's a food writer, joined forces, and we all like put in just enough money that like if we lost all of it, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. And it was kind of open as this fluke, it was like kind of a joke. And on the second day, we were like, oh shit, we've got something huge. So we opened a place that could be really scalable. Even Zahav, man, I mean, I love it. And like, believe me, we've gotten so many chances to open Zahav in different like cities, but I just don't, it is a hard restaurant. It is very personal to me. I love being able to like actually work there. It would require like hiring and training, and it's just a lot. Federal Donuts, we can scale those, and we're doing it. And it's not that easy, but we can do it. And since then, we've also opened Diesinghoff, which is what we have here in New York, and we're about to open in Miami in addition to Federal Donuts, and which is a hummusia. So we just serve hummus and pita.
Does it annoy you when people say hummus?
Yeah, well, you should hear how people pronounce Diesinghoff or Zahav, or my last name for that matter. But they're like hummus. But yeah, it's hard. I say hummus, and everyone's like, ooh, look at that. That sounds cool. Yeah, hummus is, but you know what? When people, tahina, that's the word, because they'll be like tahini sauce. And I'm like, what the is that? We have like a bunch of these like little things that will do well in different markets that are not easy to open when they're not opening anything and sort of transmitting the culture of your restaurant or of your group is really difficult. It is super hard.
By the time you open Federal Donuts, which I think you guys call Fed Nuts, which I love, so I'm just going to call it Fed Nuts. By the time you open that, was Zahav all right? Like on a better path than it was?
Zahav was all right, and it was making money, but it wasn't like we hadn't arrived yet. I mean, that took like years.
3, 4, 5. What was it? Was there a turning point, or just people started to get it?
The turning point was us. Well, I mean, after the first year, we started doing okay. But to really be comfortable with what our sort of job or role was or responsibility when it came to like Israeli cuisine, like globally, that took years. Because you go from this thing where you're like, oh, I've had shakshuka in Jaffa. I'm gonna like make the same thing. And it's going to be great. And you're like, oh, can I swear on this?
Yeah, of course.
And I'm like, nobody gives a shit if like this is the way that they make it in Jaffa, because you're not in the old port of Jaffa. You're not overlooking the Mediterranean. I'm not the character that is Dr. Shakshuka. Nobody gives a shit, you know? I'm a chef. I'm not a grandmother. I'm not like a merchant. I haven't had the same food stall that has served the same food for generations. We have to be creative. And it took us a couple years to be totally comfortable doing that. And to say we don't have those things here, but like we've got spices, we've got live fire, we've got different things that will nuance the food to make people understand what Israeli food was. So that took a while to do. Wait, so you like the name Fed Nuts?
Yeah, I do.
Can I like just between me and you?
Yeah.
Since it's only us here in this lobby.
Yeah.
We're opening a Federal Donuts and Dizengoff together in Miami, and guess what the corporate name is?
Fed Nuts?
No, so we're opening a Federal Donuts and a Dizengoff.
D's Fed Nuts?
D's
Nuts.
Yes!
That's incredible.
Yeah, you like that?
Oh, I love that.
So I feel like we need to get Snoop to be like, you know how he does that little skit, and they're like, yo, we're going to Wynwood, Miami. We're gonna go check out those 2 spots. What do you mean? What 2 spots? These nuts.
That's incredible. So let's backtrack. Where did you grow up, or where were you? You were born in Israel.
Yes, I was born in Israel, and then we moved to Pittsburgh when I was like 2 or 3 or something, and we stayed there till I was 15.
My wife's family's from Pittsburgh.
I did not know that.
Yeah, but don't ask me from where.
Why haven't we like discussed
I don't know.
that before?
Yeah, my wife's family's from there, and I meet random people from there, and they're always like, "What area?" And I forget the area.
Can I, if I like spit out many of them? Mount Lebanon, North Hills, Squirrel Hill.
I don't know, but I've been to Kennywood.
Kennywood, the Great Escape.
I've been to Kennywood to go downtown and ate beautiful views from those bridges.
Oh my God, it's sick. Yeah, there's like 300 bridges. It's like a ridiculous amount of bridges.
It's crazy. We went to Lydia Bastianich's restaurant.
It's cool, dude.
Although there's a lot that's been open since.
You got to go back and go to Lawrenceville, which is like where in high school we would go buy like PCP. And it's now like, of course, it's like fucking hipsters and like great restaurants. And my friend Justin Severino got a restaurant called Cure and Morcia, and probably, in my opinion, makes like the best charcuterie.
I feel like I've heard about that.
Pittsburgh's a cool city, but it was not a cool city when I grew up there. And we moved back to Israel when I was 15. So I spent a year in this like American boarding school in the north in a town called Pardes Chana. And then I moved back by myself, and my parents and my brother stayed in Israel. And then I finished high school, got into college, dropped out of college, moved back to Israel. My parents had already been divorced at that point, so I just lived in my mom's apartment with my brother, and we had a Russian wolfhound. You know, a borzoi. Have you ever seen those?
I think so.
It's a giant greyhound that's like really hairy. Yeah, they're terrifying. So it was like one of those.
Yeah,
in this
funny.
apartment, and I got a job working at a bakery.
Was that your first job in a restaurant?
You know, I was a dishwasher at a place called The Point, which is in Point Breeze in Pittsburgh. My dad owned like a Subway sandwich place, so I was like a sandwich artist in high school.
Did you eat a lot of cookies when you were there?
Dude, Otis Spunkmeyer cookies. Yeah, I can't even tell you, because if he hears this shit, I'll still whip my ass. But I got a job working at a bakery there, and it was like me literally walking up and down the street looking for work. It was cool because it was like a twofer for them, because not only was I a foreign worker, but I was like an American foreign worker. So they like loved it. And I had a really good time and learned how to work honestly. I learned what it was to be hard work, to participate in hard work, and what it was like to be the sort of immigrant, like an immigrant worker.
This was in Israel.
In Israel.
How old were you?
19.
Did you have bakery hours?
Oh, yeah. It was crazy, dude. On Friday morning at 2 a.m., we would wake up and go in there and make challah for like 12 hours straight. And
was it bread baking, pastry?
It's a little bit of bread. I mean, the bread there is not, that time especially, we weren't looking at like a lot of like slow fermentation, like not a lot of artisanal stuff, but we'd make challah and baguettes and that kind of thing. And then we'd make like rogalach, like thousands of barekas. And the bakery in Israel is like a meeting place for like the town, because nobody gives a shit about carbohydrates over there, and everybody eats baked goods, and everybody participates in Shabbat, whether you're religious or secular. I was like used to being a sort of recluse that participated in alternative subcultures in the US. And then in Israel, you're like part of the community, And not only that, especially in Israel, because there were like, in the bakery, there were like 5 different languages being spoken at the same time,
What types of languages?
Arabic, tons. Hebrew. There were tons of Venezuelan immigrants. And there was a couple Russians, and there was actually a Bulgarian too.
Your parents are in Israel, and your family has experienced tragedy firsthand. Is it okay to talk about
of course,
this?
Sure.
Okay. You lost your brother. Was it a terror attack?
No, so he was patrolling the northern border, and there was like a sort of an ambush. There was 3 Hezbollah snipers from Lebanon shot into Israel over the border and killed him.
How old was he?
He was 21.
How old were you?
I was 24.
Were you in Israel?
I was actually in the States. I was working at a veterinary restaurant at the time. And it happened to be, it was on Yom Kippur, and I was actually driving the car that should have been his. He was also killed like 3 days before his release. So I was driving my dad's old car that was in Pittsburgh, driving it back from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia when my aunt called me and was like, you need to like call me the moment you get home. And I pulled over to the side of the road and like got her to tell me what had sort of happened.
How did that affect you then and now?
I mean, it's a really hard thing to answer. I don't know. I mean, in a way, it sort of like shaped, who I am. I mean, there were a lot of monumental things that brought me close to like Israel prior to that, or things that kind of shape your identity or like make you, for an instance, remember like who you are. And I mean, I remember in boarding school watching Peace with Israel and Jordan, like Rabin, like, and King Hussein like shaking hands and like a peace treaty happening in real time. And while I was living in Israel, and I was like, man, this is just crazy. And then I moved back a year later, and then Rabin was assassinated. Your sense of place and purpose is altered and always sort of fluctuating. And then, I mean, none of it holds a candle to like burying my brother. And I was there a month before, and we hadn't really seen each other in like almost 4 years. So I was there a month before, and we had reconnected and were like besties, and it was just amazing. I was working at veterinary at the time, and he at that time would close for a month, like in the summer, which is like a very Italian thing to do. And I flew over, and it coincided with my brother's almost release, and they get like a little vacation before their end of the military. So we were in Israel together up and down the coast, and it was the first time I had been there as a chef, So we were like eating so much and going to the Yemeni, the Iraqi, the this, the that. And he wasn't a foodie, but like even the layman in Israel knows all this stuff about like gastronomic anthropology. It was really stimulating and really eye-opening. And my mom bought my plane ticket under the condition that I would cook dinner for her friends, which turned into like 2 nights of like 5 course, tasting menus and all that shit. And it was like amazing because we got to shop for the food, went to a foie gras farm, had a foie gras delivery. There was a guy that would show up to my mom's apartment with a fucking bicycle and a cooler of goose liver foie gras.
No shit.
And run it into the apartment. It was the coolest thing ever.
Is foie gras big in Israel?
Foie gras used to be huge. Now there's like animal rights activists don't permit it, but it used to be one of the biggest, most sought after goose liver foie gras like in that part of the country, or in that part of the world, excuse me. So it was amazing. We had this amazing time, and then I came back totally reconnected to David. And after he was killed, I buried him with all of his buddies were finished with the army, and I'd met them a month before that when we were like out at the club, at the beach. And then fast forward a month later, we're like burying him in the ground. I mean, it was really, your sense of purpose and place was really big. I felt obviously a lot more Israeli, and it just felt like, I came back from that trip, and then we were taking another break at Vetri, and I was like, I want to go back and cook for Dave's troops. And they were still stationed in the north in this base that's like right on the border. It used to be an old British mandate base, and it's like right on the border with Lebanon. And I was working for Mark Vetri, and he was like, I'm going to come with you. I'm going to cook with you. You know, it's just really awesome. And I remember I'd gone there a couple days early, and then so my mom and I picked him up from the airport, and he was like super tired because he was on this like birthright tour airplane ride. And so it was like a bunch of like 20-year-old American kids getting wasted on these flights. And he was like, I got no sleep because all these kids were like partying. And then, so we pick him up and then drive to the northernmost part of the country. He's cooking dinner and sitting next to like 20-year-old Israeli kids that are fucking in uniform that have like a few minutes left to eat to go back out and patrol the border, you know? And it was like, I saw this sort of transformation, and I took him to the spot where Dave was killed, and it's this beautiful apple orchard in this town called Metula. You know, my brother was like a really good kid. I mean, we had great parents that like loved us and worked really hard for the life that we had. And David was not violent. You know, he was like a normal kid, you know, and the way that he was killed was just so tragic. And I know that it's the way that it works, and that's the way the military works in war and all this stuff. But like, it was just, for Mark to see that was important, and it was transformative. And I think that that kind of helped shape what it is that I do now, in a way representing Israel, or the sort of values and the things that Dave died defending, you know?
Thank you for sharing all that.
Totes.
What was your first food memory as a kid? Or like the first most amazing meal you remember?
My grandmother, man, would cook these borekas, which are these like Sephardic sort of Turkish flecked turnovers that are savory. So it's like puff pastry kind of, that are stuffed with like mushrooms or spinach or whatever, but like Bulgarian feta was like what we would stuff them with. More sesame seeds than you could possibly imagine, glazed on top. And that's what I sort of fell in love with eating as a kid. And that was also one of those like decidedly foreign things. Like it didn't coincide. Like there's no way that could be confused with like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that all my friends were eating, you know?
What's the first dish that you ever cooked that you were proud of?
Well, I actually, with that grandmother, I made French toast.
Oh, really?
It was really fucking good.
In
yeah.
Israel?
Yeah, maybe it was either in Israel or maybe it was when she would visit us in Pittsburgh. But yeah, I remember taking like the pre-ground cinnamon and dumping it in the egg batter, and just, it was like probably Wonder Bread, but fried in butter, you know? It was so good, man. Dude, good French.
There's a restaurant in LA we used to go to that served French toast it was like a dessert, for dessert. It was like little sticks of I was like, I'll fucking take it.
Dude, French toast is so good, you know? Do you put maple syrup on yours, or do you get like cinnamon sugar or what?
I put maple syrup. Katie puts butter in maple syrup on her waffles too, but matzo brie. So how do you eat yours?
Okay, so I like my matzo brie not like eggy, like it's egg battered, but it's more like French toast. Less of like an omelet with matzah in it. And I like it sweet when it's like that. You know, savory matzo brie is okay, but I just don't like, I don't love it.
I don't know. My mom must have introduced this to me, but I put jam on it. Like
Yeah,
some salt and jam.
That's really good.
It's
Yeah.
delicious.
Yeah, butter too is really good.
Yeah.
Like softened butter.
Getting hungry. I'm all over the place here. Israel, States, back to Israel, worked in a bakery, came back to the States. And what was your first restaurant job back here?
So I went to culinary school. I went from the bakery in Israel to working at this like little cafe up the street. And that's when I was like, I want to be a chef. And I had kind of spent all the money that my parents had saved for me on like nothing, you know? I'd spent it on like partying and like snowboarding or whatever. So I went to the Florida Culinary Institute, which is in West Palm Beach, and I worked full time and went to school and sort of paid for school that way, which was good because it was like a real intro to like what being a chef.
You worked in a restaurant during culinary school in Palm Beach?
I worked in a restaurant in Boca Raton and also in Delray Beach.
Which restaurant?
In Boca?
Yeah.
It was called Big City Tavern. Now it's Rocco's Tacos. And then in Delray, it was called City Oyster. Are you familiar with that part of town?
I lived in Aventura for a couple of years.
Oh, get the fuck out of here. That's
Yeah.
where Stephen Cook, my business partner, was born and grew up there.
Really?
And his dad was a rabbi there, yeah.
When I went to FIU for hospitality school, I lived in Aventura for 2 years, then I lived in Coconut Grove for a couple of years.
Oh, that's so
But I
funny.
lived right on the waterways in Aventura, and it was like, this is before I, honestly, not to sound ignorant, but it's before I knew there was like a large Latin Jewish population that existed.
Oh, and they exist, bro. They run that shit down
Oh,
there.
big time. But it was like, you try and go out for a nice walk at night, and at like 11 o'clock at night during the week, they're all out like with all their kids. I'm like, these kids have fucking school?
No, dude, they don't. Because I think that when you get the Jewish, Israeli plus like Venezuelan, they turn up, dude. You know, like on school nights.
What brought you from Florida to Philly?
I met a girl down there and she was from New York and she had a brother that lives in Philly, and I wanted to like work in a city. I wanted to go to New York actually and work at like Le Cirque or Danielle or whatever, and we ended up kind of checking out Philly just because it was like much cheaper to live, and at that time too there was this big like restaurant renaissance happening. So we ended up in Philly and it was like really awesome.
And you went right to Vetri?
No, actually, I worked at a restaurant called Avenue B and a restaurant called Striped Bass. And Striped Bass was where I learned how to cook. It was Terrence Fury, who is an amazing chef, was like the exec sous at Le Bernardin, and then moved to Philly. And we were cooking incredibly good food. And at that time, it was a pretty big moment. I mean, we were really, really big, busy restaurant. You know, I remember like we had our own fishmonger. So we'd do like bluefin tuna again for entrees with like white truffles and caviar and these like $80 like lobster entrees. And it's funny because it's like, God, it was so long ago, you know, it was like 2000 or whatever. And like the restaurants like that don't exist anymore in Philly, you know. But we used to do like 300 covers on like busy nights. It was like a very serious restaurant. At that time, Lebec and Straight Bass were like the big deal, you know, and it was a really cool thing. And Terrence actually fired me.
Why?
And then rehired me. Well, at the time I was working also for his brother, Patrick, who was the chef of Avenue B. So I was working 4 days at Avenue B, 2 days at Striped Bass. And I needed to make certain that my girlfriend at the time was in like an unpaid internship, which is, it's a precarious position to be in when your boyfriend is like a line cook, you know, like there's not a lot of wiggle room. So I worked 6 days in the restaurants and then I would work on my other day, like catering or whatever. So I got a job working at Avenue B so I could basically work at Striped Bass. And then I worked both those jobs and had to make a certain amount of money. So Terrence, Striped Bass was like, oh, you want to make $12 an hour? Well, only our entree cooks make that. So hope you can do it. It was like the most competitive, every kitchen I had worked in, I was the best at. And at Striped Bass, I couldn't fucking do it, dude. And I would come in earlier and earlier.
Were you doing it and he was just pushing you?
No,
or?
I couldn't do it. I mean, it was like a lesson in humility because it was something I loved, something I wanted to do. I worked as hard as I possibly could and it wasn't good enough. He fucking fired me and I was like, dude, I will do whatever it takes. And he was like, well, I'll hire you at entry level garde manger, but it's for whatever, you know, $6 an hour, like something, you know. And I was like, well, dude, I have to take this job because I've never been not the best. And I had already taken a job. I had to work in the Hamptons that summer because I took a job working at Sunset Beach. After that, I came back that fall and started at Striped Bass bottom, like garde manger, like literally like the bottom. And in 6 months, I was like lead line cook running
Really?
line. Yeah, it was like a really important lesson, I thought. I learned more in that year than he taught me how to cook. And then I took a job working at Vetri. At the time, there were 3 kitchen employees at Vetri, and there was only 1 Vetri restaurant. I really wanted to work there. It was so different than Straight Bass, so I did that and did pastries there, and then was like sous chef for a couple of years. And
I know everyone's like, oh, millennial and all that shit, but obviously there's good staff out there. You have to find them and train. Do you have staff that bust their ass and they're like coming in early and staying late or working 2 jobs, and you have a good staff?
we have a great team. The mindset is a lot different than it was. I mean, restaurants are a lot different and there are so many of them and the culture of restaurants is very different. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I fall into this all the time and I'm like, I'm 38 years old, but I'm always like, man, kids these days. But it's really, we used to basically work for free and go into like debt and like just do all this crazy stuff. And it was cool, but I don't think it was like necessary, you know? And there was this sort of archaic system of things, which I loved because I love the craziness of it. Like I love the screaming and the yelling and the fucking like, I remember almost taking a job at Arzak. It wasn't a job. It was the restaurant in San
Spain?
Sebastian.
Yeah.
And I was applying to be a stage there. It was fucking 2 years unpaid to go work for free. Like it was fucking crazy, you know? And I think, but like at that time, all my boys were going, you know, Spanish cuisine was the thing. Everybody was going to Mugaritz and it was just what people did. And I thought that was like amazing. But now as like a business owner and as like maybe a father or maybe like a mentor, I don't think that you should have to do that. It's crazy. It seems like a monarch system. And also going to like Europe with 30 other unpaid people cooking for like 20 people a night, that doesn't make any fucking sense to me. You know, it doesn't, it's
you
not
get to come
real.
back and be like, I worked at El Bulli
Well, I'm
for
like,
2 weeks.
Great. I'm like, great. You're one of the fucking, you're like 1,000 people
yeah.
that goes there, comes back and can't open a restaurant or like pay their staff chef or like do anything that isn't at the top level. And I'm like, guess what, dude? That doesn't work here. And I'm like, and that doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't rely on free fucking labor to run a business. It's weird for a consumer. It doesn't make any sense. So like, no, nobody's like coming to Zahav to like work for free for 2 years, but like, I don't want them to. I want them to come in and be part of it. I want them to grow I want people to be great chefs and great managers and feel empowered and be part of like what it is that we do. That's what I want.
Speaking of great managers, Okan, is that your Jan's name?
Yeah, Okan.
I mean, that's a story right there, right?
Yeah, he's
Which
the
I know
best.
it, but I would love for you to share it with
So
people
Okan
listening.
he came to the States from Turkey on like a student visa, basically, and came with like, I think $800 in his pocket or something like that, and started as a busboy at Zahav and quickly became a food runner and worked his way up and is now the GM of Zahav. Got our nomination for Outstanding Service, which is fucking hilarious because we play hip hop and like make pita and laugh and shit like
Dude,
that.
do you know how many times I've been sitting in your dining room and I'll like Snapchat or Instagram, like making sure there's sound to send to people? I'm like, dude, fucking whatever's playing.
It's fun, man.
Yeah, it's the best.
He lives and breathes hospitality, and that's just kind of who he is. He's one of 3 brothers. His father passed away at a really young age, and he was like the oldest and really like took care of his mom and his brothers. A mentor to basically everybody that works with him, and is the most generous person I know, and hardworking, and is he's a partner in Cook and Solo, and he crushes it, and he, I feel like, is the American dream. He's like this, I don't know, I feel like he's like all the good things that we stand for. He is, and he's just the nicest guy, and yeah, it's amazing to watch it happen. And so I was telling you that we like totally almost tanked. At that time, it was Okan expediting and running, and me doing pastries in the morning, working lunch service, and cooking the bread 6 nights a week across from Okan. When we would do like 17 covers a night.
When I went in there, it was like 2009-ish. How long have you been open at that?
1 year. Yeah, we opened in 2008.
Were we struggling at that time?
2009, we turned it around. The year mark was the turning point for us. And I remember we had this, like, our first year, like, Zahav's 1 year old, and, like, have a huge party. And we were just like, man, thank God that we didn't have to fucking go bankrupt. Okan at that time was an expediter. And he and I would literally work across from each other 6 nights a week. And it was just like, to look back now and to what it is that we had gone through was nuts.
So you touched on substance abuse. I know Frank Bruni from the Times wrote a really amazing piece, I think, about you. It was titled Grief, Smoke, and Salvation. I would highly recommend people Google it because I think it's an important piece. But can we talk about this? Do you
Sure.
mind? When did substance abuse come into your life, for how long? You were using during the Zahav time, right? Before as well?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, I'll work backwards. Like today, on October 28th will be 9 years clean and sober for me.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. But we opened Zahav in May. I went to rehab in August. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint when, and it depends on like what your belief of addiction is. But probably from birth, I've like struggled. But my parents weren't like, they didn't drink or do drugs or anything. So it took a little bit of time for it to manifest. Like a lot of us, I partied at like a pretty young age, and it was like at a point in my life, it was like the thing that I kind of did the best. And I got myself pretty deeply involved into things and somehow came away without getting arrested or dying, even though I came close a lot. So I ended up overdosing in college, which led to my return to Israel. I had sort of chilled after that, and it wasn't like me recovering. It was just like, wow, I really like took that a little bit too far. And so years and years went by where I was like a pretty casual user or drinker. And then after my brother died, I came back, like a week and a half later. Like it was like I buried him and I came back, and then I started using things like crack and like tons of cocaine, and then eventually heroin. And it was just, I think in recovery, you personify the addiction a lot, and like the addiction is just sort of sitting on your shoulder waiting. If you're an addict, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, people go through a lot of trauma and they aren't like, no, also, I'm going to start smoking crack. I think that if you are like me, that's where your head goes. And to this day, it does. I mean, I had a horrible drug dream the other night. Now what it is me waking up thinking that I had relapsed. And for the first 5 seconds of being awake, you're like, oh my God, what happened? It just is what it is. And you have to learn how to cope and recover. So I used my brother's death as an excuse to use. And I justified my behavior because something incredibly fucked up and tragic happened. But I mean, the truth is that's not how they grieve or mourn or anything like that, as by making it about themselves and using. So it was really difficult, and it's not easy. And everybody that was around me we'd already opened Zahav, and everybody that was close to me, I'd put in like a tremendous amount of.
They all knew.
They knew, no, they didn't know, but like eventually they knew. And then it was like everybody sort of rooting for you after you've like disappointed them and lied to them. But it's, it's a constant. I've had many important people in my life that through thick and thin have been there to support me. Thank God. Now I have 2 kids that I've never held high. I've never stolen from them. They've never seen me fucked up. And it's a really beautiful thing. A lot of people say this now. They're like, wow, it must be so much easier to stay clean and sober now that you've got kids. And I'm like, no way, dude. Have you ever been in a car with 2 little kids? Like, there's nothing that will drive you to relapse than that. But the truth of the matter is that if I pick up or if I use, I will manipulate them like I did every other person, and that's a huge thing, because guilt and shame, the way that you deal with that stuff and grief and loss and all that when you're an addict that is not in recovery is by using. So it's just this really vicious cycle that is incredibly hard to break.
What made you, was someone like get your ass to rehab, or were you like, it's time?
My wife at the time and my business partner, Steve, and a really good friend found out and sort of like had an intervention. Yeah, it was like straight up intervention. And I think at that point, I just couldn't like lead the double life thing, because while that was happening, we'd like opened restaurants. So much has happened, and I was getting pressed, and people thought it was like, maybe I was just a little bit weird, right? Or I didn't need to sleep very much or whatever. And it just 5 years of like living this sort of double life was like a lot. It was exhausting. My life was a fucking lie. So it felt really good to be honest. I just sort of decided at that moment I had an opportunity to like not lie, and I took it, and it was liberating. I mean, that happened, but then there's like, the first year of like recovery, which is incredibly difficult. But even now, I mean, I still I'm active and in recovery, and it's something that I sort of seriously contemplate every day, and it's important.
Well, congrats again.
Thanks, dog.
Good for you. Honestly. Did you ever want to throw in the towel, like as a cook? Were you ever like, fuck this, I'm done cooking, either as a line cook or as a restaurant owner?
No, there's never been a time. I mean, we're always sort of contemplating and trying to reinvent. And it gets a little bit frustrating, because being a line cook and then a chef and then suddenly managing like 250 people, and I don't know, we've got like 11 or 12 restaurants. It's just a lot. Your job changes like really, really quickly. It's really difficult, and balance is a really difficult thing that I've always struggled with and continues to be. So I think there are moments where I'm like, man, there are like easier ways to do this. But I don't think that I've never been like, I don't love what I do or whatever. There's never been a point where I've like wanted to quit being a chef or a restaurateur. I need now to adjust so I can do the things that I love, which is like cooking. Or
I love walking into Zahav and seeing you by the bread station.
It's my favorite thing to do. And now it's like the last year in particular, it's become very difficult. I literally have to like schedule myself to be there.
I think it was the last time I was in Philly, I was checking out some nonprofit based restaurant, and I texted you about it, and you were like, yo, you in town? Come to Zahav. And I was like full of shit. I had eaten at like 2 restaurants already, and I was like, he's at Zahav. I have to go to Zahav.
I guilt people into coming into the restaurant.
But it's all good. You have multiple, you said 10, 11, 12 concepts. The hummus, you have Ape Fisher, Zahav, Fed Nuts, and now you have this idea for what is now open, Rooster Soup Company.
Yes.
Comes about. So I remember where I was when you told me about Rooster Soup Company.
Yes.
It's like a moment in my life for some reason. Well, not for some reason. I know the reason. It was in January of 2015, and I was in Santa Barbara visiting my father-in-law where he lived at the time because Katie and I were getting married out there, and we were doing a wedding visit. And I was driving down a road like outside Santa Barbara and near Montecito.
Oh, did I call you?
You called me.
I called you, right?
But your number was in my phone. I must have had it, or Sarah gave it to me or something like that, Rosenberg. And you're like, hey, Andrew, it's Michael Solomonov. I hope you don't mind that I'm calling you. I was like, what, dude? I'm like, you think I fucking mind when you're calling me? And you're like, I just wanted to run something by you. And I pulled over into a restaurant called Cava, which we love in Montecito. And I sat in the parking lot talking to you on my phone. And Katie's like, where are you? I was like, I'm on the phone. I'll be home in a
Call you
minute.
back, wife.
Yeah. And you had shared the Rooster Soup Company concept. So I would love for you to take us back to the conversation, or why and how and when.
So a couple things were happening. We had opened a bunch of Federal Donuts, and we wanted to get a better quality chicken for our customers without increasing the price. So we were like, we'll get whole chickens. So we got these like natural chickens that were awesome. We break them down. You're left over with like schmaltzy backs and butts and all that stuff, which everyone knows makes the best soup, right? The problem is that with
Schmaltzy backs and butts, meaning fatty.
yeah, fatty.
Yeah.
We have like a lot of restaurants and stuff, but we couldn't keep, it would be too much stock. Okay, if we were to like use it, like we couldn't use it enough. And while that was happening, my business partner Steve was asked to be on like a board or be an advisor for the Broad Street Ministries Hospitality Collaborative, or the Hospitality Board, which we then collaborated with. And basically, Broad Street Ministries is a church that is in Philly. It's an amazing place. You serve people that are hungry in Philadelphia there, and it's not them getting in a line with like ladles. It's volunteer, heavily reliant upon volunteers. People sit down at tables and are served multiple courses. I think they do 7 lunches now a week. I could be wrong. Maybe they do 5 lunches and 2 dinners, but it feeds thousands of people. They've got a chef, they've got budget for food, and it's awesome. In addition to that, it's also an address for 3,000 people that don't have homes, right? So if you don't have a mailing address, you can't get things like benefits. You can't apply for a job. You can't apply for an apartment. You can't do things, right, without an address. So it's a mailbox for 3,000 people. It's also psychiatric counseling, art therapy. It's a clothing drive. But mostly the idea of like serving people that are hungry, that need it, used to be, or still is in a lot of cases, people lining up on the sidewalk. That does not dignify people. That does not make them feel like they're part of society. And Philly is one of the largest cities and like the largest the poorest large city basically in the country. For us, and certainly for Steven, who like had this sort of epiphany after visiting Broad Street once, it was like, we are, you can't walk down the block in our city. We can't walk from one of our restaurants to the other without seeing somebody that like needs help, right? And we preach hospitality on every single level, yet there are people that like need help, So I was like, oh, we've got all this chicken soup. Let's just drop it off. And Steve's like, dude, it's not like a soup kitchen. You can't just give these people soup and have it be okay. So Steve and a couple of people from Broad Street came up with the idea of opening this restaurant that was reliant on the backs of this chicken that is food waste, right? This chicken that is food waste that actually, by sparing these backs, gives us a better product for our Federal Donuts customers. Also, so we create this menu that features soups amongst salads and sandwiches, and it has a full bar, and it's like a cool restaurant, but like kind of a luncheonette. And 100% of the profit of Rooster Soup Company goes towards Broad Street Ministries. So we donate all of it. You come in and have a bowl of soup, and you're basically covering the cost of like a meal for somebody.
There will never, probably ever, be a better segue into my social impact giving zone of this interview.
I didn't even do that on purpose.
No, I love the concept, and I had the fortunate opportunity to visit, and I sat down with Danny from your team, and she was telling me about an organization that you've done some work with. There's a guy, and he hosts dinners for Palestinian families and Israeli families. Am I making sense?
Danny was probably telling you about was OGS, which is Our Generation Speaks, which is an amazing organization that basically incubates Palestinians and Israelis that are looking to form startups, brings them to like Brandeis, and incubates these ideas and awards seed money for startups. The idea thinking that you give opportunity to Israelis and Palestinians are like-minded in the sense that they just want to succeed, you know? And if you take them sort of out of their element, and Our Generation Speaks, founded by this amazing kid named Ohad Hello, who's much younger than I am and considerably more intelligent, but I just think that it's representative of probably a lot of people in Israel and a lot of people in Palestine that just want to crush it, like all of us, right?
Hearing a little bit about that from Danny was one of the main kicks in the ass for me to start this podcast.
Get out of here, really?
No joke. Because I had like fiddled with it and I love chatting with chefs and I hear these awesome stories. And when I started chatting with her sitting at the counter at Rooster Soup Co., I was like, all right, that's it. I'm like, I'm fucking starting this podcast. She's like, really? Are you starting a podcast? You should. And that's one of the big kick in the asses for me.
I appreciate that. I mean, we want to take it a little bit further and actually bring people together, like at the restaurant. But we're going to have events and you should come and be part of it. It's really amazing.
I would love to. That's great. You recently won James Beard Award for Outstanding Chef in the U.S., which is an incredible honor. And you gave an incredible speech.
Oh, thank you.
And I heard it, but can you just share the premise of that speech for the listeners? I'm talking about overall, this one's for you. I don't know, something about that just like hit home. You just rattled off people probably who have had an impact in your life. I mean, it was like, my partner, Stephen Cook, this one's for you. Eli Culp, this one's for you.
Yeah.
You know?
I just feel like I owe all of my success to these people that are in my life. And I feel like the other nominees who deserved it as much as me I'm so fucking honored to even be on those lists with those people, right? It's a huge deal. It's a huge list. I am honored. I'm like so proud of like every one of my employees. I ended up forgetting a line for my team at Zahav. So I'm going to take this opportunity to thank Andrew, Matt, Jorge, and Dave. Okay, my Zahav team. I blew it on the stage. It was hard at the lights. You can't tell if people are laughing at your jokes or get it. And I had to pee and I was thirsty at the same time. But I just feel like we're in these positions because of these amazing teams and people that have been on our lives forever, to like pushing us to be there, and all of the guests. And yeah, it was a really huge moment, man. It was like bananas, and it was like such a big night. And like it was cool. I heard Steven Starr also thank The Door, which I thought was amazing, because I had this big joke. I'm like, it's a bunch of like narcissist chefs that don't ever mention their publicist, right? And I'm like, we're fucking at like James Beard Awards. Like, come on, dude. Like, you know, there's like a whole committee of people that we're trying to convince, and magazines and this and pitching. And we have all these people working for us to try to get us out there. And yes, of course, the food has to be excellent. We have to be great at our jobs, but it's like...
The story has to get out there too.
The story has to get out there, and you have these groups of people that believe in what you do, that like battle for you like all the time. So I thought it was really cool that Stephen mentioned that, you know, and I think it was a really big deal, and it was important for us to talk about the people like Sarah that are in our lives that sort of vouch for us. It also happened to be Yom Ha'atzmaut. It was Israel's Independence Day. It was like Independence Day that day. So
that's amazing. And
the last time I had won, I won Best Chef Mid-Atlantic in 2011, and it also fell on Israeli Independence Day.
How about that?
So it was a big one. It's the fucking biggest honor ever. It's like amazing to me that we are even considered for it. We got a couple really awesome nominations. Camille Cogswell was nominated, she's our pastry chef at Zahav. She was nominated for Rising Star. We were nominated for Service, which is like fucking amazing, and Outstanding Chef, and I can't believe it.
Yeah, that's great. I put this under the giving back section, if you will, but your trips to Israel, do you do it for staff or friends or both?
The first trip that we took to Israel with people that we led was for our opening staff at Zahav. We've taken a couple, we did a chef's tour, which was like 8 chefs and Joe Nathan, the cookbook author, came with us. And
why do you do those?
Well, that one we did, it was my brother's 10-year, it was the anniversary of his death, actually. And so we did a big tribute dinner for him. And we did it just because we wanted to lead a tour in Israel. And the people that come on the trip subsidize the chefs. And I'm like, when do you get to hang out with like Joe Nathan, Murad Lalou, John Sawyer, Nate Appleman, Adam Sobel, Jason Marcus? Who am I forgetting? Alon Shaya was on that trip. Steve Cook. It was like such an all-star. So I know I'm forgetting people. Right. And then the second second trip was Alon and John Currance and Ashley Christensen and Emily. So it's like it was us and like 13 other people, you know? So that was really cool. I haven't done one of those in a while though, and I guess I'd like to do another, but we just don't have the time. You're going to come with us, right?
Dude, don't twist my arm. I've
Dude,
never
you
been to
should-
Israel.
What
I was just
the
talking about
fuck,
this
man?
last night. I went
What
to
is wrong with you, dude?
Nur.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Nur
Yeah.
on 20th. I was dining with a colleague and she was asking me if I've ever been to Israel. I was like, actually haven't. She's like, what?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense, actually. It's a little bit weird.
I know. I'm down.
Well, why don't you come?
I'm down.
All right.
We talked about your kids briefly. So I want to know how you're setting an example for your kids in giving back. How old are they right now?
So David is almost 6. Lucas just turned 3. Lucas, he doesn't like to give anything even, or even
No sharing,
hugs,
no giving.
hugs, kisses to me, and no. None of that. David, we have like a little tzedakah box for him. And
Can you explain?
tzedakah is basically charity and it's philanthropy. In every home, in every business, whatever, everybody has a tzedakah box and you put in what you can and then you give it. And so for him, it's we're going to buy toys for kids that like don't have it or whatever. And I want him obviously involved, you know, but it's a really weird thing. I had this conversation with him last night because both my kids are like relatively picky. David's getting much better. I was talking about, we were eating an apple. I was cutting the apple. I eat the core and my dad eats the core.
Seeds and all?
Seeds and stem and all that shit. And it was literally from my dad, I think, growing up with fucking nothing. I was eating the core and my kids were like, oh, that's the worst, you know? And I was like, dude, your Saba does this. And he does this because that was what they had. This is like, I guess also my Jewish guilt in tandem with the good principles. But I was like, you know, you won't eat that pasta with chicken, right? And you're going to eat this apple. But like a lot of people don't have choices. A lot of people are just happy to do that. And when Saba would eat the apple core, it was because that was it. They didn't have anything else. So it was like trying to explain that to like a nearly 6-year-old.
Did he get it?
I think they get it, but I also think it's like really instilling like sometimes just phrases for them to get. Like for him to understand that tzedakah was for kids that like didn't have toys, like that works. And he'll elaborate on that and he'll repeat it back to me. And I think eventually he'll understand it.
Do you speak Hebrew to them?
We do minimal Hebrew. My Hebrew still sort of sucks.
Can you tell me in Hebrew what your kids mean to you?
I can do this Hebrew. כן, הילדים שלי כל החיים. כל החיים שלי, כל האהבה, כל הדברים שחשוב עליי, זה בשביל הילדים שלי. Should I tell you what I said?
Yeah.
So my kids are my life, all my love, all the things that matter to me are for them.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right, let's do speed round.
Okay.
First thing that comes to your mind. What did you have for dinner last night?
I had the pasta that my kids would fucking eat, dude. And it was delicious.
Did you make it?
I did. It was chicken, butter, tomato, olive oil, Parmesan cheese, walnuts too, yeah.
When was the last time you ate fast food?
I don't remember, but I don't like have a problem with eating fast food on occasion.
What's your favorite fast food?
I think Chick-fil-A is pretty exceptionally good. But I'm also like, I grew up going to Wendy's. So I like junior bacon cheeseburgers plain. Because I think
Dude, that's what I order.
it's $1.06, dude. Like it's nothing. But what you do is you buy 2 of them and you take off the bun and you squish them together, bro. Have you done that?
No, but I will
Welcome.
be next time Katie and I are on the way home from an event. We're hungry and go through the Wendy's drive-thru. Just if that happens to happen.
Sure. I don't mind. I don't eat fast food often, but I don't like have a problem with it.
Yeah. If you flew into Israel tomorrow, what's the first thing you're eating off the plane?
I would probably have to stop at a bakery and eat like a bag of borekas.
Name a smell in the kitchen you love.
Brown butter is kind of a hard one to beat. I like the charcoal as it burns out. I think that's a really good smell. We make lemon verbena syrup from now till late September. We have a farmer that will come with like just bags of fresh verbena. And when he shows up, usually it's like in the middle of service. It's like, I'm like, oh, Farmer Paul's here because lemon verbena is like one of my favorite smells ever.
Smell in the kitchen you hate.
Sometimes with like radishes and like pickling, it just smells like nuclear like fart bomb.
What pisses you off in the kitchen?
I don't like it when people put shit on their cutting board that isn't for cutting. You know, like if somebody puts like a plate on their cutting board, I have a hard time with that.
If you had nothing to do with food, what industry would you be working in?
I think it would be really interesting to be in either drug counseling or like do research. I think that would be cool for me. Like I would enjoy that. Honestly, if I could like stay at home with my kids, man, and like take care of shit, I would do that. I think it would be fun.
In closing here, what would you want people to say about the career of Michael Solomonov, your legacy in the industry?
I'm not good with these, man. I'm like very passionate about what it is that I do. And I feel like I have worked to open up people's mind about Israel. And I guess that would be it. Really what I want is for you to come to Israel with me, Cappy. And then my work is done. No, I don't know. It's hard to say about myself. I think it's like a little bit weird. People are going to say what they want. Hopefully it makes an impact though.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, dude.
Quote, "We preach hospitality on every single level, yet there are people that need help. This is one of the precise reasons I started this podcast." Thanks again to Chef Michael Solomonov. Find more on him and his restaurants at www.cookandsolo.com. That's cook, the letter N, solo.com. And join us next week when Beyond the Plate presents Just the Plate, a short segment where chefs describe a recipe, sharing insider tips on what makes this specific dish meaningful to them. Michael will discuss a dish called tabit. This is a chicken and rice dish made popular by Iraqi Jews that Michael makes for his 2 children at home. You may find me and keep up to date with this podcast across all social media platforms at On Cappy's Plate, or go to www.beyondtheplatepodcast.com. This episode was produced by myself, along with Ian Cohen, Joel Yeaton, aka The Wizard, and Shant Petrosian. Thank you all. Our music has been composed by Goldford. Find him at iGoldford. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on your listening site of choice. And thank you for listening to Beyond the Plate. I'm Cappy, and remember, there are never too many cooks in the kitchen.